So today's lesson is lesson 9-8, sine, cosine, and tangent ratios. This is basically getting into trigonometry now. Alright, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to find trigonometric ratios. So it says find the sine of A, cos of A, and tan of A. Well, before you can do that, you have to understand a few things. There are some formulas to remember. And the formula that you remember is this. If you can remember this, so, ca, and I'll write it down right now, and then I'll explain to you what this all means, and toa. Okay? So, katoa. Write that down, memorize it, learn it, love it, okay? Because for the formula for sine, it is opposite over hypotenuse. And we know what hypotenuse is. That's the opposite of the 90-degree angle, which is your C. For cosine, it's adjacent over hypotenuse. Okay? So adjacent to and hypotenuse. And we'll talk about what adjacent and opposite means in a moment. And the last one is tangent, which is opposite over adjacent. Those are the three formulas that you're going to be using for trig. Okay? Write those down, and then I'll explain what they mean to you. So take a second to write those down, and I'll explain how you use this and why you want to remember so, ka, toa. Because you're going to be using it for the rest of your life. It's trig, you need to know it. So, ka, toa, sine equals opposite over hypotenuse, cosine equals adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent equals opposite over adjacent. And remember, I told you you're going to need a scientific calculator for this, so make sure you have one. Alright, so finding the sine of A. Okay, so to be able to find the sine of A, you find the angle A, okay, and remember that sine is, so we're looking for the sine of A, that would be, we're looking for, if we're looking for the sine of A, we're looking for the opposite over the hypotenuse. So, what is opposite of A? 6. And over the hypotenuse, and we always know the hypotenuse is that line that's opposite of the 90-degree angle. So your answer is 6 over 10. Sometimes people write it as 0.6. Okay? So that would be the sine of A. So now we'll go to the computer. So measuring the leg of the opposite of angle A and measure the hypotenuse. So if we had to substitute that in, remember we talked about it, 6 over 10 or 0.6. For cosine, it's the measurement of the leg adjacent to A, and the measure of the hypotenuse. Adjacent to A, here is A, it's what's attached to it. Adjacent, attached, they both start with the letter A. That's a good way to remember it. What's attached to the letter A? Well, the number 8 is, and then the hypotenuse we already know is 10. So when we substitute that in, we get 8 over 10. The last one, tangent, is the opposite over the adjacent. So what's opposite of A? 6. And what's adjacent to A or attached to A? 8. So 6 over 8 would be your answer, or 0.75. Alright? So now it's your turn. Go ahead and draw this triangle out and see if you can find out the sine of B, the cos of B, and the tan of B. So this time we're using this angle B, okay? Remembering that opposite of here is the hypotenuse. Since we're doing B, this would be the adjacent, and the opposite of B is obviously 4, okay? So go ahead and see if you can set that up. Alright, so now you have to find the value of sine 19 degrees to the nearest 10,000. 10,000, how many decimal places is that going to be? You got your tenths, your hundreds, your thousands, your 10,000s. It's going to be 4 places after the decimal. So keep that in mind as well. To do this, you can use your calculator, and that's the neat thing about this. You type in sine, you hit the sine button, hit 19, and press enter. Some of you will just press 19 and then sine and then equals. So you got to figure out your calculator, but this is the number that you should be able to come up with. Now, if you don't have a calculator, tomorrow in class, I will have, or your next class, I will have a sheet for you that you'll be able to read this. So there you go. It asks the nearest 10,000. So we find tenths, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s. The number that comes after the 5 is a 6, So that makes that 5, a 6, and there's your answer to the nearest 10,000. Okay, let's have a look at another one. Now this is the value of cos of 51 degrees. So it's the same idea, but this time instead of hitting sine, you're going to hit cos on your calculator. Cos 51, enter, and get this. And then to the nearest 10,000 would be 0.6293. Alright, same idea. And we'll do one more here with tangent of 24. So we use the tan button on our calculator. Hit tan, 24, enter. You might want to hit 24 tan equals, whatever it might be. Figure out what it is on your calculator to get this. Alright, some of you might even have to hit a second function button. But you have to get to know your calculator, so make sure you do. It has to be a scientific calculator, remember. If you don't have a scientific calculator, like I said, I'll have a sheet tomorrow in class to help you out. Alright, so here's your turn. Now you get to try and figure out if you can find the answers to sine 63, cos 14, and tan 41. Alright, so now we have to find the missing measurements. I'm just going to move this out of the way for you. Round into the nearest 10. So what we have here is we have 12 inches, and we have an angle 71 degrees. But what we don't know is x. And we know that x is what? X is the hypotenuse. So we're going to either be using cosine or sine to find this answer. And what do we know 12 inches is? From B, we know the 71 degrees, so 12 inches is attached to B. It's not opposite of B, so we're not going to use opposite. We're going to use adjacent. And if we're going to use adjacent and hypotenuse, then that tells me SOHCAHTOA tells me I have to use ka, which is cosine equals adjacent over hypotenuse. Okay? So the measures of an acute angle and the side adjacent to it are known. Okay? The measurement of the acute angle is 71 and the side adjacent to it is known as 12. You need to find the measurement of the hypotenuse, which is the C, right? The hypotenuse. Use the cosine ratio because it's A and H. That's what you're looking for. So we go and we substitute these numbers in. The cos of 71, okay, because that was the angle that was given, equals the adjacent, which is 12, over the hypotenuse, which is x. I was like, okay, now what do we have to do, Mr. Visser? Well, basically, we want to get 12 by itself and x onto the other side. So we're going to multiply both sides of the equation by x. Why would you do that? Because once you have that, you can then divide both sides by the cos of 71. How do I do that on my calculator? Well, you have to type in 12 divided by cos 71. And you're going to have to get into the habit of doing that. 12 divided by cos 71, hit enter, and you get your answer. Okay, 36.85864,184. And so approximately x, the hypotenuse, which was what we were looking for, is 36.9. Alright, seems like a lot of work, but once you get used to how to put that into your calculator, I think you'll be fine. Alright, so let's give it a shot. And this time, what do you know? What do you know? That's what you always have to ask yourself. You got to find the missing measure and round it to the nearest tenth. But what do you know? Okay? You know that the angle that they're giving you is 35 degrees. You never use 90 degrees. It's always one of the other two. So you know it's 35 degrees. You know that you have the opposite information, which is 15. And you know that the x is attached to 35. You do not know anything about the hypotenuse, so we're not going to use hypotenuse. So we know opposite and we know adjacent. So if I'm thinking SOHCAHTOA, T-O-A, I know opposite of adjacent, I'm going to have to use tangent equals opposite over adjacent. So go ahead and set it up and see how well you do. I'll give you a little bit of help with this one, just because it can get a little confusing. So what we know is we know the tan and our angle is 35 equals, and it's always good to go T equals OA, so to remember what you're using. Opposite is 15 over adjacent, which is x. Okay? And now remember, you want to get rid of the x and then divide by the tan of 35. So see if you can do that. Go ahead and pause and see how you do. Alright, next example is about architecture. Okay, so the next example is architecture. A tourist visiting the Petronas Tower in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, stands 261 feet away from their base. She looks at the top at an angle of 80 degrees with the ground. How tall are the towers? You Again, a good idea to draw a picture. So, it says, it stands 261 feet away from their base. Okay, so that means that if I was going to draw a base, I know that they're standing way over here, 261 feet away from the base, and she's looking here. So she's standing right here and she's looking. So here's your little person, okay? And they're looking at the top of an angle at 80 degrees, okay, with the ground. Okay, so that means that this is where your 90-degree angle is. So what do we have here? We want to find out how tall are the towers. So we want to know right here, this tower right here, how tall it is. Okay? So what do we know? We know 80 degrees. We know the opposite. Okay? This is the opposite here, across from it. And the one that's attached to it is the adjacent. So we know tan equals opposite over adjacent. And now we just go and set it up and solve. Alright, and so watch the computer as it does it for us. Okay, so you're going to use a tangent ratio. And its tangent of 80 equals x over 261. This one's a little different than ones you were doing before because x is on the top. So actually, I like these ones. These are a little easier. We multiply both sides by 261, okay? And now we have 261 times tan of 80 and enter, and you get your answer. So these ones are actually a little bit easier when you have the x on the top and the number on the bottom. But you'll get used to this as you do more and more of these, okay? So that building was 1,480.2 feet. Now it's your turn, all right? Go ahead and write down this question. Move that out of the way for you. Okay, and it says, Jenna stands 142 feet away from the base of the building. She looks at the top at an angle of 62 degrees with the ground. How tall is the building? So again, you got to draw your picture and remember that Jenna is down on the ground and she's looking up, okay? So keep that in mind. And it's a 62-degree angle, and she is 142 feet away from the building. It's a good idea to draw pictures, you guys, I'm telling you, all right? Hit pause, go ahead and solve that and see how you do, and we'll go over it tomorrow in class. And that is the end of lesson 9-8.